Lesson 38, using properties of equality to solve equations. Today we want to look at a couple properties of equality. You can see in the picture here we have quite a few different properties, but we are just going to be focusing on the addition property, the subtraction property, the multiplication property, and division property of equality. So first off, what are those properties of equality? What do they mean? Well, the addition property of equality means if two sides are equal to each other and you add the same number to both sides, then they're still equal. So in the example here, if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C. Subtraction property of equality says the same thing. If two sides are equal, such as A is equal to B, then if I subtract the same number on both sides will still be equal. So A minus C is the same as B minus C. Multiplication property of equality says that if two sides are equal, like A is equal to B, then I can multiply the same number on both sides. A times C is the same as B times C. The answers will still be equal. And with division, same thing. If both sides are starting off to be equal, I can divide the same number on both sides and the answers will still be equal. And then the last one, the symmetric property of equality, just says if A equals B, then B equals A. So if one side equals the other side, then you can switch it and have the other side be equal to the first side. So let's take a look at some examples. After spending $2.30, Robert had $5.70. How much money did he have before he spent $2.30? So we're looking at how much he had to start with. And so you can see our equation here, x minus $2.30 equals $5.70. We would have to use the addition property of equality, which just means we add the same number on both sides and they'll still be equal. So we want to get x by itself, so I do the opposite of subtracting $2.30, which would be adding $2.30. And we're going to do that on both sides. And I'm left with x left over on the left-hand side. 570 plus 230 would give us $8. And just a reminder, with these properties of equality, just think of like a pan balance. If they're starting off balanced, you want to make them remain balanced. And so if you do something on one side of the equation, you must do the same thing on the other side. And I like to call those all these rules of equality, properties of equality, under one rule. And that would be like the golden rule of algebra. Whatever you do on one side, you must do on the other. Let's look at the next one. 1.5 is equal to x minus 2.3. So right now both sides are equal to each other. I want to solve for what x is. I need to do the opposite of subtracting 2.3, which would be adding 2.3 to both sides. When I do that, I'm left with x on the right hand side, and I have 3.8 left on the left hand side. A couple other examples here. Solve and write the property used. So now we're going to solve it, but then we have to tell us which property of equality we're using. So here, x plus half equals 3/4. Now I know I'm going to be adding and subtracting fractions, so I need to have common denominators. So it's really going to be x plus half and 3/4. Those are the common denominators 4. So to make half into fourth, that would be the same thing as 2/4. So I'm going to just rewrite it as x plus 2/4 equals 3/4. Now I can get x by itself by subtracting, do the opposite of adding, which is subtracting 2/4. So I subtract 2/4 on both sides, and I'm left with x equaling 1/4. And what property did I use? Since I was subtracting on both sides the same number, this would be the subtraction property of equality. And the one on the right hand, solve and write the property used. Here, since I'm subtracting 1.3, I need to do the opposite. Add 1.3 to both sides. I'm left with x equaling 5.5. And since I was adding the same number to both sides, this would be the addition property of equality. Couple other examples. If a 12-month subscription to a magazine costs $8.40, what is the average cost per month? The key word here is the average. And when we do average, you're normally going to be dividing by a certain number. So here, our example, we have 12m equals $8.40. Since there are 12 months in a year, we're going to divide the $8.40 by 12. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 12 on both sides. And so now I have $8.40 divided by 12. So just grab our calculator very quickly. We'll do 8.40 divided by 12. And we get m equaling 0.7, but since we're dealing with money, this would be 0.70, so it would be 70 cents per month. One on the right, 2/3 W equals 3/4. Now we are multiplying by a fraction. The opposite of multiplying is division. But remember, when we divide by a fraction, it's really the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2, because that would give me 6/6, which is just 1. So now I just have 1 W. And remember, whatever I do on one side, I must do on the other side. Since I multiplied by 3/2, I need to multiply by 3/2 on this side. And that would give me 9/8. And that would be my answer for W. Next one, Peggy bought 5 pounds of oranges for $4.50. Solve the equation 5x equals $4.50 to find the price per pound. So I'm going to start off writing my equation here. So the opposite of multiplying by 5 is dividing by 5. So I'm going to divide everything by 5. And I get x equaling 0.9 or 90 cents. Make sure you put that 0 at the end because we're dealing with money. And the last one here, solve and write the property. So I have 1.2 equals x divided by 4. The opposite of dividing by 4 is multiplying by 4. So I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides. And 4 times 1.2 equals 4.8. And since I multiplied by both sides, this will be the multiplication property of equality. So the property is always going to be whatever you're doing on both sides. So if you're multiplying on both sides, that's the multiplication property. If you're dividing the same number on both sides, that's the division property of equality. And our last slide here. From 8 a.m. to noon, the temperature rose 5 degrees to 2 degrees Celsius. Solve the equation T plus 5 equals 2 to find the temperature at 8 a.m. So I'm going to start off writing my equation. The opposite of adding 5 is subtracting 5. So I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides. And that would give me a -3. It would be a -3 degrees Celsius at 8 a.m. And the last one here, solve and write the property. 3/5 x equals 1/4. The opposites of multiplying by 3/5 is dividing by 3/5 or multiplying by the reciprocal, which would be 5/3. Now it would leave me with 1x left here. Whatever I do on one side, I must do on the other. So I'm going to multiply by 5/3 here. I end up with an answer of 5/12. And my property, since I'm since I'm multiplying by the reciprocal, this one, you're dividing by a fraction as well. So we could consider this one either multiplication or division. I would consider this one either way, just because if you're dividing by a fraction, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So we could just say multiply and division property of equality. So that is our lesson on properties of equality.